Thank you for joining us today. Today's panel will last 75 minutes, which will be divided as follows. We will listen to our speakers, who will have 15 minutes for their presentation, and then there will be 10 minutes for questions and answers. In order to respect the time allotted, I will let each one of you know when you have 3 minutes left before the time is up. Participants are invited to leave their question in the chat box, from where I will take them and direct them to the speakers when appropriate. Let me remind you that this panel is important for Mexico and the region because it explores how media records could be used to measure the femicide situation in Mexico. Also, it will be discussed how the unilateral legislation in the country shortens the time it takes for women to file a divorce. And finally, we will listen about femicide laws, which arguably do not contribute to the reduction of killings of women. First, we will hear from Roxana Gutierrez Romero. She's professor of policy and quantitative methods at the Queen Mary University of London and works on topics on conflict and gender violence. Her ongoing research agenda focuses on measuring gender violence, femicides, political violence, and the socioeconomic impact of criminal organizations in Mexico and Central America. Roxana presents us today her work entitled Femicides in Mexico, a New Database. Roxana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela, for the introduction. So I'm going to present this new data set on femicides, which is joint work with Nayeli Turbe, who is also here on the panel. And as you might know, femicides is the hate killing of girls and women because of their gender that sadly have risen significantly over the last 2 decades in several Latin American countries. And a clear case of this is Mexico. In the country, we have femicide statistics collected systematically since 2015, but several analysts and specialists suggest that these official statistics have a clear underreporting, given some lacunas we have in legal definitions about what's a femicide across the country, and inconsistencies in how these crimes are reported. And we also have a number of independent efforts from activists who have documented femicides using independent sources in a series of blogs and maps. But yet we don't have a systematic data that allow us to analyze what are the potential drivers of this growing trend of femicide. So in this ongoing project, we have 2 objectives. First, we built a national database of femicides in Mexico, where we analyze local and national media records on a daily basis, and we classify the information. And our second goal is to understand and analyze what are the potential drivers behind these femicides. Why do we analyze only media data? Well, because first of all, we wanted to have access to secondary sources to understand what is the real incidence of femicides aside the official records. And also media records provide narrative about these events in terms of who was the victim, who was the alleged killer. Sometimes we have information where and when the event occurred. And the media has been reporting these cases consistently on a daily basis. So we wanted to see what sort of information we could compute and to help us elucidate about the potential real incidence of this problem. So far, we have read and classified 11,000 media records at the local and national level. And as it's standard in these international data sets, we have made sure that there are not duplicate records. We have coded each event with information about the victim, the alleged killer, the circumstances, from January 2016 to December 2020. Whenever possible, we have added the georeference of where the victim was found. And one of the main challenges of analyzing media records is to say, okay, once you find in a local newspaper that a crime occurred, how do you classify that crime is a femicide or something else like a homicide? So what we do is we look at the definition, legal definition of what is a femicide according to the federal law. And then using that definition of what is a femicide, then we classify each event. So according to the federal law, a femicide is a hate killing of girl or woman that has at least one of the following 7 characteristics. So the victim presents sexual violence, or perhaps presented threats or signs of violence before the killing, has some humiliating wounds or overkill wounds, has a kinship relationship with the alleged aggressor, was kidnapped before the event, and her body was left in a public place. So this definition is consistently used in 23 out of the 30 states that the country has. We have applying the same legal definition of what is kind of femicide. And other states have a slightly different definition, but all follow more or less this classification. So let me show you the official records that we have from the official statistics. This is the number of femicides we have in the country from 2016 to 2020. And this is the number of official homicides of women that have happened in Mexico during these years. And I'm also showing you another very sad statistic, which is the number of girls and women reported as missing. As you can see, there is growing trends of violence. And our main concern is to assess to what extent the official statistics of femicides actually reflect the incidence of femicides. So in the next graph, I'm going to show you what we find according to the media records. Here, the lower line is the number of femicides according to the official statistics. And this dashed pink line is the number of femicides we find if we analyze media records and we apply the official definition of what's a femicide according to the federal law. As you can see, the incidence is almost twice of the official number, and also with a growing trend that is increasing from 2016 to 2018, and then it continues to increase at this accelerating pace. Then when we started classifying so many instances of crimes of women, Naya and I had some concerns about what is really a femicide. Because in some circumstances, the victim was left not in a public space, but in her home. Or sometimes show evidence that was evidently killed, but not with humiliating wounds. So we apply a slightly different definition, like the victim perhaps was left in her home without, obvious home invasion that went wrong or some sort of other crime. The number of femicides could be actually bigger if we apply a different definition of what we have in the legal code. But if we just follow the legal definition, for certain, the incidence of femicide is much bigger than the one that the official figures show. So one of the concerns that I had is like, to what extent these media records reveal the real extent of femicides. So what we did is, let's look at another way in which you can measure femicides. And in this way, we analyze also official death certificates. So in Mexico, official death certificates do not tell us if a crime has been classified as femicide or not, but it tells us a lot of information about the event. And we can use the same definition in the federal code to classify a crime according to the official death certificates. So if we analyze in detail the death certificates and analyze whether it satisfies or not with the legal definition of what is a femicide, the incidence of femicide is actually very similar to what we find according to the media records. So this suggests two things. First, that the official statistics are misclassifying femicides in a large proportion. And second, that the media records and the death certificates are potentially much better proxies of the real incidence of femicides in Mexico. And let me show you the spatial distribution of these crimes of femicide. So this is where which municipalities have higher number of femicide according to official records, the media records we collected, and the media records we have used slightly different definition. So the darker the blue is the number, the municipality has more femicides. And as you can see, the concentration of where more femicides happen seems pretty similar. And it's also surprisingly quite well correlated to the areas where there is higher number of girls and women reported as missing. And if we analyze further, which are, for instance, the top 10 municipalities with the highest number of femicides, we have a different story if we look at the official statistics or the media records. In the official statistics, these are the top 10 municipalities with the highest number of femicides over this period. And if we look at the media records, we get that Ciudad Juárez, Tijuana, and Acapulco are in the top 3. And the incidence is way different to what we will see in the official statistics. Then a main advantage of looking at our media records is having a georeference code to each event. And with this georeference, we can have access to more in-detail analysis at area level, almost at the street level. And in some areas, such as Ciudad Juárez, we see an enormous concentration of femicides in some neighborhoods and in some streets. So this is a powerful tool that can help policymakers to perhaps design better programs to reduce this kind of killings. Then, based on the media records that we have classified, we can attempt to do analysis of what is potentially the alleged killer. Unfortunately, in 80% of the cases, the media record does not mention who is the alleged killer. But whenever an alleged killer is mentioned, the most mentioned alleged killer is the partner of the victim, or a relative, or an ex-partner of someone in the community. But for the vast majority, we just don't know from the media records. From the media records, we also know that 31% of the cases were killed by a gunshot or by a wide weapon, or were beaten to death, or were suffocated. For 35%, the media does not report any specific causes, it's unknown. So with this kind of media records, we can get a lot of information about what are the potential causes. And we can do more in-depth analysis at the area level. So here, I'm going to present some preliminary analysis of what is driving femicide rates at the municipality level, where I'm going to put as potential explanatory variables all the main variables that I suggested in the literature that affect gender violence. And if I analyze exclusively the official statistics, what I find is that the only explanatory factor that is telling me why there are more femicide areas in some areas than others is the incidence of homicide rate of men. And this is for me not surprising, because in the I know there is a very high spatial correlation of violence of different sorts. So what I find here is the areas that have higher homicide rate of men also tend to have more femicides and more homicides of women. But we have a slightly different explanation when we look instead at the femicide incidents from the media records we collected. So according to the media records that we collected, we have suggestion that the areas with presence of drug trafficking, which are experiencing violence, are more likely to have also more femicides. Also, areas where a higher proportion of the population are employed in the informal market also are more likely to have this sort of femicides. And if we slice a bit further about who killed this woman, we get a slightly different answer. For instance, if I look only at the killings committed by the partners of the victims, I get that the story is not driven necessarily by drug trafficking violence, it's something else. In areas where the men earn more than women, these are areas where I see less intimate femicides and fewer infanticides, so girls killed by the fathers. So just to conclude, I think this georeference data set provides a very powerful tool to understand better the phenomenon. We think that the official statistics misclassify at least 50% of femicides. And these minor legal differences that exist across states add to the noise and misclassify about 9% of femicides in the country. And there are multiple causes of this phenomenon. And I think there are two important factors, which is drug trafficking and economic conditions that create stressors at home. So sorry, Daniela, for over-exceeding my time, but I hopefully the audience who's here can give us some more suggestion about where to push your analysis, and any ideas that you can have would be very welcome.
Thank you, Roxana, for your presentation. I think it's time for moving on for some questions. The audience can leave their questions in the chat box, and then I can direct it to you. But I don't know if Nayeli has some questions for you.
Yes, Roxana, why did you use GDLT in the as a reference in this database?
Thank you, Nay. Well, it's very challenging to collect records on femicides because there is no information of where you should look at. So the first instance of where we look at these records was local newspapers, the national newspapers. Then we also look at the private efforts of some activists that have collectively analyzed data on femicides and reported in their blogs. But then we also look at the GDLT, which is the largest database on media records worldwide that have information about news in Spanish and English. So on the basis, we downloaded absolutely all the events reported for Mexico, and we collected some extra information on femicides that were not captured in other independent blogs or independent maps that already exist in Mexico. So that was an additional source that we found to complement our data. Yes, so Carlos asked, is there a way in which we can access the database? So Carlos, we've been working in this. I've been working on these projects for maybe 6 years, or if not more. And so far, we have managed to clear data for 5 years. So it still is work in progress. I hope to release it by next year, once we have collected a bit more data. But the amount it takes to collect such data, it's just monumental. And to make sure that we're not double counting. But with the efforts we have, I think we can do a lot of analysis on what are the drivers of femicides collectively. So my goal is to release this data as soon as possible, potentially next year, the latest.
Do you think that legislation should change according to other characteristics that you find in the research?
Yes, so that's an important question of what is a femicide. It's not a clear cut. Different countries have different definition about what is a femicide. So not only different countries have different definition of what's a femicide, in Mexico, different states have different definitions about what is a femicide. So this creates noise. If you kill a woman in one state in a femicide, and you do that the same in another state, you will be committing different crimes according to the law. So I think it will be beneficial for every single state to adopt exactly the same definition of what is a femicide to reduce the noise that exists in the data already. If we have the same legislation across all the country, we will reduce in at least 10% misclassification of femicides. So I think that will be beneficial for everyone.
Roxana, Carlos also wants to know where can we get updates of this database?
We've been working on this database for years, and I have not released any updates because I want to release something that is free of our own mistakes. So I will be releasing updates about our working papers and our data sets on a regular basis in my Twitter and in my website. I know that there is a policy brief that is being produced by my university, and it's going to be published next month, providing updates. But just stay tuned in our Twitter and our own personal websites. We don't have a personal website for the project yet.
He said updates regarding when it's going to be published.
Yes, so updates in our personal websites and our Twitters, we will be releasing updates on that.
Thank you, Roxana. I think another relevant question should be, what would you propose to improve the national record statistics?
Yes, that's a very important question, Daniela. And I think, why do we have so many misclassifications of homicides? Why do we finding 50% extra femicides in death certificates and in many other records? I think something is happening at the local level where perhaps it's lack of resources, different definition of what's a femicide, and different ways in which we're applying the same law. So I think we need consistency in classifying what is a femicide. And understanding the femicide law is not easy. As Nayeli and I had trouble understanding, okay, how do you classify this crime where the victim was left in her home? There is no evidence that it's a robbery or a mugging. So I think the prosecutor officers and the local police need training in deal with these ambiguities. I think that will clarify the real incidents, and maybe we will increase the number of femicides for sure, but at least we will have a much better picture of what's happening at the local and national level.
Thank you, Roxana. We have another question from the audience. Regarding the higher incidence of femicide in areas affected by the presence of cartels, can we say whether these women are part of the cartels or perhaps not involved at all?
That was my main motivation to get involved into this project. I wanted to answer that question. So from the media records, it's impossible to tell if a woman was a member of a drug cartel. In maybe 50 cases, it is clear that there was a presence of drug trafficking, that the husband was drug trafficking in 50 cases out of the 1,000 cases we have. But I couldn't get any sense whether these women were indirectly involved or even their friends were directly involved. However, when we do the statistical analysis, the areas that have more femicides is the areas where we know there is drug trafficking. So there is illicit cultivates, there are drug labs producing synthetic drugs, and there are also signs that different criminal groups are fighting for the area. So this suggests that there might be just casualties associated, there are weapons in the area, there are more drugs in the area, there are impoverished areas. So this is like a very difficult combo of weapons, drugs, and then poverty. So I don't think per se we have evidence that these women were part of this criminal organization. I think they're just casualties of this generalized violence.
Thank you, Roxana. Someone asked, which university are you at, and are you collaborating with any other countries, universities on this? and this could be a very interesting project to review globally.
Okay, so this is my own individual effort, which I have collected some minor funding from my own university. And on the basis of this minor funding effort, I've gathered, Nayeli joined the project and she's working with me at Queen Mary University. I'm not collaborating with any other university or institution. However, I have a colleague in my own school, in my university, who has other projects on collecting data on femicides for the entire region of Latin America, and she's collaborating with the MIT. So we have now 2 people in my same university, in my same school, where we're collectively gathering data. I am focused on Mexico, and she's focused on helping NGOs in Latin America collecting this type of data based on media records and other independent sources.
I think that's all for question and answers. Thank you very much for answering our questions, Roxana. We will now listen to the second presentation.
Thank you.
We will now hear from Nayeli Turbe. She's a PhD candidate of gender violence at Queen Mary University of London. Her research interests are gender violence and crime. Her presentation is titled Impact of Unilateral Divorce on the Duration of Divorce, the Case of Mexico. Nayeli, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. Yes, today I will present the progress of one of the papers I've been working at the moment as in my PhD research. And the objective of this presentation is to assess the impact of unilateral divorce legislation on the average time it takes for individuals and couples to achieve divorce in Mexico. I will explain in a bit what is the role of unilateral divorce and describe it better. But first, I want to talk a bit about the problem that I'm trying to target in this paper. So in Mexico, we have a problem of violence towards women, as Roxana has already presented. And we have one of the most complete surveys to measure violence against women, which is published every 5 years since 2006. In the last publications we had on this survey, we identify that there is a prevalence of violence in marriage, particularly on the psychological violence, the physical violence, and the sexual violence that women are experiencing within their marriages. So we need to ask what is happening to these women and what options they have if they want to get out of these relationships. And in the same survey, this is for the data of 2021, they also mentioned that even if they are having this consistent violence in their marriage, 31% want to get a divorce, but they are still married. 24% think that divorce is not feasible for them. And also 44% think, have separated already from their partners once, but they came back to them. So we are having a problem here because women don't feel that they are able to achieve divorce. So what is the role of unilateral divorce in this scenario? Unilateral divorce, even though the target of this legislation is not to cope directly with domestic violence and the problem, it includes some characteristics that can help women to achieve divorce faster. Why? Because with this legislation, one spouse, one individual, can go directly to the office and ask for the divorce proceeding to start, and they don't need the agreement or the other spouse. So the process should start immediately. And another advantage is that you don't need to justify a cause for divorcing and prove it to a judge. So this will improve the process and will make it a bit more faster, perhaps, we will see. And what happens with this law in Mexico, as you can see in the map, is that it is legal in some states at the moment, just in 20. And even though it was introduced in 2008, it has been like gradually introduced in the other states. So we can say that we are moving towards the unilateral divorce in the country. So what happens with divorce in Mexico is that we have two different proceedings. You can go on the administrative way, that it's only for mutual agreement divorces, and usually it's faster because you have the signatures of both individuals. And in the other proceeding, that is judicial, you can have some variations of mutual agreement, but you will have also the unilateral proceedings since 2008 and the causal divorces as well. Causal divorces were, let's say, the traditional way in which individuals could achieve divorce when their partners were not in agreement with a proceeding. So what used to happen with this type of divorce is that you will need to present a cause to a judge, and then you will need to present evidence to justify why you want to get a divorce. So this is still happening in some of the states where we don't have access to unilateral divorce. And the problem with this is that even though you have a huge list of causes that can be enough for asking for a divorce, it can be extremely exhausting for couples to achieve divorce in this way. So after unilateral divorce was introduced in 2008, we have seen a rise in the divorce rates. And this has been proved by other papers. And the idea is that gradually unilateral divorce will replace the causal divorces, but we are on the go to do this. So when we analyze data by gender, we identify that both women and men are filing for divorce. But what we want to answer really is who is benefiting from this law and what is the effect of the law on the time it takes to actually attain divorce. Just for noting this issue here is the pandemic effect. To answer this question, we have information of records of divorce by year at the municipality level. This comes from the National Bureau of Statistics and Geography. And we have collected also all the information regarding the states that do have access to this law that we will consider as the treatment groups, and the cases of the states that do not have access yet to this law, which are the never treated units, which are these ones. In this paper, I'm using a difference with multiple time periods. In recent years, there have been some discussions regarding the canonical method of the difference in difference, and it can cause bias sometimes when you have multiple time periods. So for this paper, we are using a method that aggregates or has a strategy aggregation to summarize the effects of the treatment by groups and time periods. And what we do is that we are using this method because we identified that the setup accomplish or follows the assumptions that are mentioned in here, which are that the law is not reversible in the states. This means that once the law has been approved, you can go back to the traditional divorce proceeding. We also are following the limited anticipation of the law in the states. This means that the states won't decide by themselves if they activate the passing of the law or not. So there is not anticipation of the treatment in the states, and there is no way to know who is the state or which state will activate the law or pass the law next. We also follow conditional parallel trends, and we also check for variation between treatment and control groups, as is shown in the last figure. So for the models, what we have done is that since unilateral divorce can be only initiated by one person, the only way to measuring the effect is to test what is happening on samples of divorces initiated by one person. So we are using a sample of judicial divorces, and also we have isolated the effect for another sample, only considering causal divorces. In the first model for the judicial divorces, we identify that there is a reduction in the proceeding of divorces for both men and women, considering the states that have access to the law, and comparing them to the states that do don't have access to this law. And we identified that men tend to decrease their divorce proceedings in 3 months in average, 3.4, while women decrease their proceedings in average 2 months. So apparently, this law is making the divorce proceeding faster for men than women. It's also important to mention that we are including controls on population size, region fixed effects, and covariates on number of children, age, and marriage duration. These are the charts for the first model, considering the gender effect. As you can see, the effect seems to decrease more for men. In the second model, we have test the effect only on the sample on causal divorces, and we identify an opposite effect, considering that on this type of procedures, the extension of the divorce tends to be so much longer, particularly again for the case of men who are experiencing an increase of even 6 months in the duration of the divorces in the states that have access to the law. And women also experience this extent in the procedure, but only in 3 months. So as you can see, this is the difference. There's a lot of variation in these models, because what is happening with the introduction of unilateral divorce is that people is filing more for this type of proceeding than the causal proceeding. So what will happen at one point is that the causal proceedings won't exist anymore. So these divorces that remain in here are extending so much because of a process of adjustment to the introduction of the law. As a conclusion, I can say that unilateral divorce law has fastened the time to attain divorce in states that have access to the law, that men tend to get divorced faster than women. This can be because of different reasons, and particularly in the literature, there are a lot of suggestions regarding the access that men have to financial resources and the possibility to pay for better lawyers that can make the divorce process faster for them. And in the case of women, women tend to take care of children, and also tend to ask for the custody of the children more than men. So those factors can be influencing the time that is taken to achieve divorce. And we also can conclude that ground divorce proceedings are taking more time after unilateral divorce was introduced. Yes. So I will say that if a woman is experiencing, or a man too, is experiencing a situation of violence, the fastest way to get a divorce is unilateral divorce. So that's all for my part, and I'm happy to answer your questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, Ayali. You have talked about a priority issue in the region. I think that the audience can leave the questions in the Q&A chat box, so then I can and direct it to you. Do you believe that this unilateral divorce laws benefits women, especially when there is violence?
Yes, I think the law can provide a legal mechanism that it's more feasible for them than a causal divorce, and they will help them to escape abusive relationship. But I think the main concern is also that women know that they have access to this proceeding, because if they don't have the information, the official information, and the way or how to do this, they won't consider the possibility of achieve divorce. And also, I think it can prevent the abuser from using the threat of divorce to manipulate the women, because now that the divorce is approved, they can't manipulate them by saying, if you do this, I will divorce. So I think it helps a lot.
Do you recommend to implement the unilateral divorce law in all the country?
I think we are going on that way. I've read some cases about women who have been traveling to the States where unilateral divorce is legal because they need to access this law, and because it's urgent for them. And also, as I mentioned before, the cases of causal divorces are disappearing. So if this is working in the states where the law is already legal, I think at some point it will be legal in all the country.
Roxana, maybe you want to make some questions to Nayeli?
Yeah, I was curious about why men in your data set appear to get divorced more quickly. You don't compare the two groups together, so you're analyzing separately both groups. So the effects are so large for men that appear to be statistically significant. But I wonder whether you have access to other surveys where people are asked the constraints they face to get divorced, especially the financial constraints, and test what the literature suggests, that is men have more resources, therefore they hire a lawyer. So whether we have evidence of that, or whether women face other kind of institutional pressure or pressure from their partners not to get divorced, and that slows down the process for them.
Yes, at the moment, Endira's survey does not capture any information regarding the process of achieving divorce. They only ask for, they used to have 2 questions on how much time women have taken to achieve divorce since they start thinking about it until they do it. But they discontinued this question since 2011, so we don't have any more data about that. But I do think that economic independence can affect the decision to divorce. And in some cases, men might be more financially secure than women, and they are likely to afford for a faster procedure of divorce, while women might stay in marriage due to financial dependence. So I think those elements should be studied further in my research. Okay. If I don't have any more questions.
I think that's all the questions we have. So thank you for answering our questions, Nayeli. We will now listen to the final presentation. We will now hear from Roxana Gutierrez Romero, Professor of Policy and Quantitative Methods at Queen Mary, University of London. Roxana presents us her second work entitled Femicide, Laws Do Not Reduce the Killings of Women. Roxana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. And this is again work in progress, where I'm looking at whether femicide laws are effective in reducing killings. And I think this is a very important question because femicides is a major public health issue across the Latin American region and, of course, in Mexico. For instance, in 14 out of the 25 Latin American countries, they have the highest and the fastest growing femicide rate in the world. And in response to this public health issue, over the last 2 decades, 16 countries have implemented femicide laws. So these are laws that recognize hate killings of girls and women because of the gender, a special kind of crime, and also with associated harsh penalties. And surprisingly, these laws are very popular in the region, but not in other regions, not outside Latin America. And there are some European countries that are considering whether they should adopt this kind of laws, despite that we don't have any evaluation of whether these laws are effective or not in reducing the killings. So in this project, I have 2 objectives. First, to understand, to evaluate the impact of femicide laws in Mexico, and to test whether states that have these femicide laws and add more laws who have a gender perspective are effective in reducing the killing of women. And there are several advantages of analyzing the case of Mexico. First of all, the country was among the first one in Latin America. It wasn't the first, but it was among the first one to implement the femicide laws. And also, interestingly, the femicide laws were not applied to the entire country at once. They started being adopted in some states in 2010, and then gradually being implemented across each of the 32 states. So by 2019, absolutely all the 32 states had adopted a femicide law. And given the federal system that Mexico has, states have the autonomy to implement different penalties if they wish to. And from a methodological point of view, this gives us lots of advantages because we can test whether states that implement harsher penalty for femicides are more successful in reducing this kind of killings. And I can analyze, well, what happens if these states also implement other sort of laws that are known to reduce gender violence in other settings. So I mentioned before what's a femicide. According to the federal law, it's a hate killing of girls or women who satisfies at least one of these 7 characteristics, and 23 out of the 32 states in Mexico have exactly the same legal definition. Other states have some minor differences, but at the end of the day, they're important. So what data will I use to evaluate the impact of these femicide laws that have been implemented in Mexico since 2010? Well, I will use 3 sources. I will use the official number of homicides of women, which I think is a good proxy of the violence that women face. I will use the official number of women reported as missing, which I think is also a very good proxy of the violence that women suffer in Mexico. And now, I don't have official data on femicides since 2000 or for a long period from official statistics. The individual efforts that we have on collected media records, it takes so much to classify records, so I cannot use this for this study. So what I do instead, I analyze the official death certificates. So as I mentioned earlier, official death certificates provide a lot of information that can allow me to classify different crimes as a potential femicide. So I use this official death certificate as proxy to classify femicides in the country. So let me show you how femicides look in Mexico over the last 20 years. So if I look at death certificates over the last 20 years, this is the incidence of femicides, which is it has a similar trajectory to homicides of women. And if you look only official figure of femicides, the trend is also similar. But for official femicides, we have data since 2015. And let me show you as well the spatial distribution. Here on the left, I show you the killings for women, and on the right, what's happening for men. Usually there is where there is violence against men, there's also violence against women in terms of similar spatial distribution of homicides, of missing people, and also the incidence of femicides according to the death certificates. So what I'm going to do is look at what is the impact of a state implementing a femicide law. And the method I'm going to use is called staggered difference in difference, as recently proposed by these two authors. The method is intuitively very simple. So what this method is doing is look at what is the change in the number of killings before and after the introduction of these femicide laws in states that adopted such law. And we compare this change to the change in killings before and after the adoption of femicide laws in states that have not adopted such law yet. So if we find that these two types of states are changing the killings in the same rate, that means that the law is having no impact whatsoever. So if we have this difference, this zero, that means, you know, you can implement a femicide law, but in practice it's making no impact whatsoever. So I'm going to apply this method, and I'm going to control for a number of factors I know that are driving femicides according to the literature. So I'm controlling from the wealth of the area, the unemployment rate of men and women, and the number of men killed by guns, which is a good proxy of criminality and availability of weapons. So I'm going to graphically show you the impact of these femicide laws. Here, I'm showing you what is the impact of femicides after the law was implemented, 10, 20, and so on, 70 months after the law was implemented. And as you can see, the impact is zero. That means that the change of killings in states that have the new law is exactly the same as the change in the number of killings that are happening in the states that have not adopted yet the law. So it's having no difference having the law or not. And I find the same null effect for homicides of women, and I find the same null effect for missing women. So then I think, well, perhaps I should look at what is the impact of prison sentences. And my intuition is perhaps that states that have longer prison sentences, if someone has committed a femicide, perhaps they will manage to reduce even further these crimes. So I analyze that next. And now what I find is that the states that have harsher penalties for femicides, the change of killings is exactly the same as the change in killings in states that have not adopted these femicide laws. So the law is making no difference. And that's the case for homicides, and missing women. And then I think, I thought, well, maybe I'm looking at this problem in the wrong way, because the spirit of the law, perhaps, is to implement harsher penalties if one commits femicide compared to the penalties available in homicides. So then I'm showing you here the average sentence if one is found guilty of committing a homicide, that's in blue, and the average sentence if one is found guilty of committing a femicide, and that's in orange. And you can see lots of variation across the states in Mexico. 2 states, the average sentence for femicides is lower than the average sentence for homicides. So it's a lie that all states have harsher penalties for femicides. And in 9 states, the average prison sentence for femicides is exactly the same as for homicides. So what I do next is like, okay, is it the case that states that have much harsher penalties for femicides than for homicides have any difference in reducing their crimes of killings of women? And this is what I show in this graph. And I found no. Actually, states that have harsher penalties for femicides in comparison to homicide do not reduce either these killings of women, femicides, or missing women. So it is very depressing. And I said, okay, maybe what happens if a state has adopted a femicide law and then years later allows women to have abortion? And I know from the international literature that when women are allowed to have abortion, usually gender violence goes down at home, and usually we see a reduction in homicides. So I analyzed the impact of adopting legalizing abortion or decriminalizing abortion in Oaxaca after it had successfully implemented a femicide law. And I compare Oaxaca to states that had only femicide law and they have not yet decriminalized abortion. And again, I find no impact of having these two laws together, femicide laws and decriminalizing abortion, no impact. And then I said, okay, lastly, what other international law has been evaluated and has been successful in reducing the killing of women? And that's the unilateral divorce law that Nayeli has explained earlier. So it's allowing people to divorce quicker from unwanted relationship, reduces stresses at home. And what I do is analyze what happens if a state has a femicide law and then adopts an unilateral law. And I compare the change of these states in terms of killings to what is the change in the number of killings in states that only have the femicide law. Once again, I find no impact on the killings of women or the number of women and girls that go missing. So in conclusion, what I find is that these laws are having no impact. And what I have learned from this ongoing project is, first, it's not always the case that femicides carry harsher penalties than homicide. This information shocked me when I found it. I was expecting that femicides always will carry harsher penalties in every single state, and that's not the case. The second thing that I learned from this project, well, you know, regardless of what penalty you implement for femicide, they make no difference. And this is really sad. And even if you add more gender-based laws that provide more rights to women and to people to divorce quicker from unwanted relationship, they are not making any difference in affecting the killings of women and girls in Mexico. So I think even if the laws are very beautiful, even though Europeans might want to adopt it, in practice, they're having no impact on reducing the killings of girls and women. So I think this is not a matter of putting on paper law. When on the ground, these laws perhaps are not implemented with such degree of impunity. So this is ongoing work in progress. If you have any idea on how can I improve my evaluation, I will appreciate. I think I have sliced the data as much as possible. If you think I have missed something, I will appreciate your advice and your suggestions.
Thank you, Roxana. I have just finished on time. I think the audience would like to listen your opinion about what is failing. Is it something regarding the judicial process, or is it impunity?
I think we have in Mexico an enormous snowball of violence that no one is stopping it. And laws alone will not stop this. Someone was telling me, perhaps this is the issue of corruption. I said, no, there are so many crimes that the prosecution officers cannot deal with. I think the latest report of INEGI published, I think a few days ago, suggests that there are 3 million cases that are in the death archive because they cannot identify the killer, the assassin, the crime. So nothing can be done because the prosecution officers are well overwhelmed of crimes in Mexico. And without local and national security of addressing violence that affects women and men, we won't deal with this with only laws. I think laws are a very easy way to gain voters, to give the impression that the government is doing something. But once we have our beautiful laws, I think we need to do something else. What else? This paper doesn't tell me what. It's just telling me that implementing laws is not working. I think we need more research about what you asked. What is happening at the local level? And the research that we know at the local level is that these prosecution officers are completely overwhelmed. They're having fewer and fewer resources over time, when the exact opposite should be happening. They should be having more resources to investigate, to prosecute, to investigate cases, and change the strategy of national security. I think that's where should we focus in the next 6 years.
And can you share with us your thoughts about why these laws together that does not have any impact? For example, abortion specifically, abortion law?
That's a very good question, because I'm analyzing until 2020. And by then, only 4 states had adopted this decriminalization of abortion. Now, recently, the entire country has done that. And my feeling is that even though we apply these new abortion laws in the entire country, they will not help to reduce crimes. Because I don't think the main driver of domestic violence is unwanted pregnancies. And I think abortion laws are a very important step to provide rights to women, but they are not intended to reduce the number of killings of women. I think that's ultimately the reason why they are not reducing killings of women in Mexico. And I don't think they will do so in the future, but I hope I will be wrong. But my experience of analyzing femicide laws is that they are not stopping this slow fall of more and more women gone missing, which is very weird in the data, and also more and more femicides that we've seen.
In your experience, what can be done to reduce killings if the laws are not working then?
I think from the work we presented earlier, there are different causes driving femicides. Some are obviously intimate partner violence, which Mexico has almost no programs to deal with. In some circumstances, it's economic hard conditions of the households, which Mexico is reducing more and more the support that we have for the poor. And there is this black box that is related to drug trafficking, where there are lots of presence of weapons. Anyone can get a weapon. And there's obviously evidence that the government has not been systematic in reducing drug traffickers, because sometimes supports one drug cartel and not others. So I think we need a change of strategy in terms of how we deal with national security and how we support households that are suffering from domestic violence.
Carlos asked, do you think a crime prevention focus could have a bigger impact instead of the legislation focus?
I think our laws are beautiful. And I know Nayeli and Daniela know the work of Rebecca Jensen, that she has analyzed different laws that Mexico has. And our laws are in many ways, even they are imperfect, they're in many ways suited for the kind of crimes that we're experiencing. But because they're not implemented, because the assassins are not arrested, because there's so much corruption and so much impunity, no matter how many laws you patch, they will not slow down. I think we need a different strategy to deal with domestic violence and to deal with the systematic forces we have driving violence at the local level and the national level.
I think we have no more questions. So we have reached the end of our panel, from which we can conclude that there are many challenges of a better typification of femicide in Mexico, as well as the areas of opportunity of national statistical records. We have also heard about the reduction of time to get a divorce thanks to the introduction of a new law, a fact that undoubtedly improves the situation of many women who wish to end violent relationships. Finally, we were left with important reflection of the new effect that legislation on the issue of femicide has had on the incidents. There was a great panel that invited us to think on Mexico and its current security situation with a gender perspective. We thank again those who joined us and the speakers who shared their research with us. We remind the audience that in the conference website, you can check out the